Yeah. See, have you ever wondered like why an elephant always give birth to a baby elephant and not other animals? And not only that, why a mango seed always forms a mango plant and not other any plant? So it's a very big question mark, and that becomes a very interesting factor to know like what is the reason for it, why this legacy or why these characters have been transferring or they have been carrying from one generation to other generation. So there this principle of inheritance and variation comes into the topic. So given that they do, are the offsprings identical to their parents? Like we human beings, are we identical to the parents? Some plants are identical to their parents. Some animals are identical to their parents. But some animals, okay, they are not identical to their parents like human beings. So even children's, their offsprings are not identical to their parents. So they show some of the differences in their characteristics. Do they show the differences in their characteristics? So have you ever wonder like why siblings sometimes look so similar? Twins, they look so similar to each other that you will be unable to recognize both of them. As if you recognize them both as same. You will not be able to differentiate the who is the elder one and who the younger one. Or sometimes siblings are completely different, even though they are siblings, even though they are twins. Okay, but still they are completely different. And how? Why? So this all questions comes in the mind. There are several relevant questions that also deal with scientifically. Okay, they also deal with what? Scientifically. So it's a branch of biology called as genetics. So whatever the questions that I have been putting in front of you right now, so we need to study it, we need to understand it, we need to deal why this variation is happening and why the same is being carrying from generation to generation, to study everything, to bring up this every question in one relevant detailed aspect. So there a subject called what? Genetics comes in its deal. So in this unit, okay, basically we are going to study about Mendelian's law of inheritance, then inheritance of one gene, two gene, sex determination, mutation, genetic disorder. I'll be explaining you one by one in detail, okay, in all the lecture series. But right now we will be discussing about the Mendelian's law of inheritance, where it is, and inheritance of one gene. So these are the two aspects that we are going to discuss in this video. Okay, cool. So coming to like what exactly is this genetics? See, when I told you that there is something, okay, the subject that is the genetics, this subject deals with inheritance, okay, as well as the variations of the characteristics from parents to the offsprings. So there is a variation, right? So there is actually what? There is a variation between parents and their offspring. So yeah, we are also aware and we are studying why this variation is happening and how this variation is happening. So that also comes under the subject. So the inheritance is actually a process by which the characters. So we need to understand what is inheritance now, right? So inheritance is actually what? It is a process by which the characters are being passed from parents to the offspring, to their offspring. So from the parents to their children. So inheritance is a process of characteristics that have been passed on from their parents to offspring. So it is basis of inheritance where variation is a degree by which progeny differs from their parents. Inheritance is a kind of characteristics that is being passed from their parents to their children's, from parents to their children's, whatever the characteristics has been passed, that is inheritance. Then what is variation? And inheritance is actually a basis of heredity. Okay, so hereditary characteristics. Oh, you look very similar to your grandfather. You look very similar to your grandmother. So this is a kind of heredity. This is a characteristics that has been inherited from your grandfather or grandparents, basically. So that is inheritance, where variation is the degree by which the progeny differs from their parents. Like we differ completely from our parents, physical appearance. Our face is completely different from our father and mother. Okay, so that is called as variation. There might be a color variation, there might be a hair color variation, there might be, your voice, your characteristics, your personality variations. So they are called as variation. So variation is nothing but a degree by which the progeny differs from their parents. Clear with this point? So then can I move to the next point? That is, human knew from as early, like we human beings, we know as early as 8,000 or between like 1000 BC that one of the causes of variation was actually hidden in sexual reproduction. That means even before we humans somewhat knew and had an idea that whatever the variation that has been absorbing between this offspring in the offspring, right? So might be hidden in sexual reproduction. That is what they're trying to say. So they exploited the variations that were naturally present in the wild population of plants and animals to selectively breed and select the organisms that possess desired characteristics. So later on, what these human beings actually did, so they took up this chance called they have started selected a wild population of plants and animals, okay, which are having a desired characteristics. Okay, they started selecting those wild plants and animals, and by using them, by breeding those, wild varieties, they try to bring up, okay, some possibilities of desired characters in the offspring. So this is what human beings started doing. It is very simple. Now after understanding this variation is actually hidden in the sexual reproduction, they took two different varieties, wild varieties, which had different desired characters, okay, and they made it breed to each other, they breeded it, okay, so they breeded it as a result to bring up a selection of organism that possessed what desired characteristics. That means after breeding these two wild varieties together, whatever the offspring, right, so they had the desired characters which we wanted. So that is the experiment they actually did, and as a result what came. So we called it as artificial selection. Okay. So what happened there? They took some of the domestic ancient wild cows or ancestral wild cows. So which was wild is nothing but a natural cow. Okay. So we had well-known Indian breeds such as Shival cows in Punjab. Do you know what is it? Shival's cows in Punjab is one of the well-known Indian breeds. Okay, well-known Indian breeds. So it has been recognized that our ancestral cow. So it has been inherited, the characteristics and variations were been observed. Okay. That means it is an hybrid mode of cow. So where they brought up two ancestral cow together, and as a result, what happened? They got a desired character here. Okay, they got what? Desired character, and this is a cow. So now can I move into the Mendel's law of inheritance? Okay. So according to the law of inheritance, George Mendelian, he conducted some experiment, that is hybridization experiment. So the word hybridization is nothing but, so here we are trying to bring two different, characters to bring together in the coming generation. That is, whatever the desired characters, we need to bring that in a coming generation. So that is called as hybridization. So where one say like one specific A and B. So A has a desired characteristics, that is tall plant, and B has a desired characteristics, that is giving resistance towards some insects. So what happens, this character is present in two different plants. So crossing these two different plants together and bringing the desired characteristics in the next generation, that is the one plant will be having both the characteristics, that is it also grows taller and it has insect disease resistance. So that is called as, hybridization experiment. So he actually chose what garden pea plant for several years, like 1856 to 1863. And later on, by the experiment for several years, he proposed a law of inheritance in living organism. So in that, it was the first time where in biology, the statistical analysis, then the mathematical logic was been applied. Okay, a kind of problems in the biology was been introduced. See, in biology, nobody can think or imagine that, okay, mathematics has also been added, right? So most of the students, why do they take biology? Why do they like biology? Because they don't like mathematics. But very first time, George Mendelian, he brought up this statistical analysis and a mathematical logic with his experiment. So, and his experiment has a large sampling size, say like many years. Okay. So, which gave an accurate or a correct data collection, a correct result that we can say. So, what he did, he investigated the characteristics in a garden pea plant that were manifested as two opposite traits. Traits is nothing but two opposite characteristics. Say, like one plant he took was tall or draft plant, and another one was yellow or green plant. As a result, Mendel conducted such artificial pollination or cross pollination experiment. If you remember the sexual reproduction in flowering plants, I told you artificial pollination, cross pollination is done between two different plants or between the same plants. Remember, so that principle was been applied here using several true breeding pea lines is nothing but same generation plant. Okay, so there is no alteration between them, having undergone continuous self-pollination. Okay, self-pollination is nothing but, so the pollination is done by within the same plant for generation to generation. There is no changing. So for this, he actually selected 14 two breeding pea plant varieties. Okay, so pea plant varieties. And what are they? What varieties were there? So one was stem height, height of the plant, stem height, character. Contrasting character was, one was tall and another one a dwarf. Is nothing but which was very small. So this is the character, and contrasting character is nothing but you will be able to see this or this. Okay. So stem height was been considered. The height of the stem might be either tall or trapped as nothing but shorter. The second one was flower color was been considered. So the color of the flower could be either violet or white. Then flower position was also been considered. It could be axial or terminal position. Pod shape. inflated or constricted. Then pod color, whether it is green in color or yellow in color. And shape of the seed, that is whether it is round or wrinkle. And color of the seed, that is yellow or green. So these were the characteristics and these were the contrasting trails that was been considered. Having these things, okay, taking these kind of characters. So crossing over was done and different, theories and different, what do you say that results were being proposed based on inheritance pattern. Clear to you? So we will go with inheritance of one gene now. Okay, now let us move on to the topic that is inheritance of one gene. See, what happens is if we take out one such hybridization experiment, which was being conducted by Mendelian, so it's something like crossing over, which was done between two, uh, you know, characteristics, two plants, between two plants. So one, the very first hybrid generation. So just to know like what kind of generation was being, they came when two different, characteristics were crossed together. What kind of hybrid was being introduced or what kind of hybrid was formed in the next generation? That was very curious. See, what happened is the very first generation that came was said to be F1 generation, right? So it was called to be what? F1 generation. So, and the next generation was called to be F2 generation. So what actually happened here? He collected a seed producing as the result of crossing, okay, producing as a result of crossing, and then he grew them in what do you say that generative plants of first hybrid generation. Okay, say like he took two different character of the same plant. So one pea plant was tall and the another pea plant was draft or it used to be a shorter in length. So what happened here is Mendel lived, he actually self-pollinated. Before self-pollinating, what he did, he took two unlike character, then he crossed the tall plant with the draft plant here, tall plant with the draft plant. As a result in F1 generation, he got all the plants were tall. Okay. So is it hybrid? Why is this hybrid plant? Because you can see two types of character here. One is capital T, another one is small t. Right? So there are two gametes. Can I call this as gametes now? Fine. So they are parents here. Okay. So they are pure homozygous. So in general, if I need to write it in a proper way, if I need to write it in a proper way, so you have a parent here. So parents, one will be tall, which is crossbred. Another one is tall or small. So what would be the gamete here? It will be capital T, it will be small t. So when they were crossed together, okay, so resultant F1 generation. Okay, now what will be the F1 generation? F1 generation will be both the gametes are going to fuse, but here only one of the gamete is going to express its dominancy here. That means all the F1 generation were to be tall plants, and the F1 generation is homozygous or heterozygous. It will be heterozygous, where I can also say it as hybrid crossing. Clear? So this is what comes in F1 generation. So when this F1 generation plant that we got were self-pollinated, that means now I have got this gamete. Where it is? Yes. So now I have got this F1 generation. When this F1 generation was self-pollinated, okay. So when they were being self-pollinated, as a result, okay, the ratio was 1 is to 4 or 1 is to 2 is to 1, something like that. So you can call me like where it is. Okay. See, in F2 generation, when self-pollination or selfing. So when they were self-pollinated, that means the parents here are tall and dark. So as a result, what we got in F1 generation, all were tall, right? Good. So now, after like once you do the selfing, selfing is nothing but self-pollination in F1 generation plants. So that means tall was F1 plant was again crossed with the F1 plant itself. So as a result, what we are going to get now, again we have two gametes here now. I'll be discussing this thing even in depth. Can I make a box here, right? I can arrange a box, right? Checker box. Right. So what will I be getting now? Capital T, small t. Here also capital T, small t. See, when there is a crossing happens, as a result, you'll get, sorry, yeah. So I can call it as 1 and 2, just for your convenience sake. So when I'm crossing this, it becomes capital T and capital T. So capital T and small t. Here capital T, small t and small t. So we are getting here how many times? 1 is to 3. Out of 4, 1 is to 3. So where 1 is tall, 1 is to, sorry, 2 is to 1. So 1 is tall. The second, the 2, that is 1 is to 2 is to 1 is a ratio. So what is the 1 is to 2 is to 1 ratio? Genotypic ratio. So where 1 is what? tall plant, where 2 is again a tall plant, and another one is actually dwarf plant. So what could be the phenotypic ratio now? Now, see, I need to understand this one specific thing, that is what happens in a condition where homozygous and heterozygous condition, most of the way the dominant character gets, that means some character like here capital T is getting dominant over the recessive. As a result, what is happening, the dominant character has been expressed. This is very important point. So as a result, what happens when you see here, the percentage will be 25%, then 50%, and then again 25%. So as a result, so can I call it as the ratio? Ratio, the tall ratio is, that is, out of all this thing, so what is the tall plant ratio? 3 is to 1. So tall plant ratio is T is to 1. So that, but a genotypic ratio will be what? 1 is to 2 is to 1. So if 3 is to 1 is a phenotypic ratio, that is 3 out of 4, 3 are tall and 1 is draft. So what would be the phenotypic ratio? Then what would be the genotypic ratio now? 1 is to 2 is to 1. So 1 is homozygous tall plant, 1. Then 2 is heterozygous here because we have two characteristics where capital T is being dominated over the small t. That is, the tall plant is getting dominant over the recessive plant, that is the draft plant. And another one will be what? So it would be again homozygous dwarf plant. Got it. So now the thing that I need to remember is the genotypic ratio as well as what? Phenotypic ratio. So phenotypic ratio will be something that is 3 is to 1 ratio is the phenotypic ratio. So that is its characteristics. So 3 are tall where 1 is short. Remember this. It's a very simple logic way of remembering. So where after phenotypic, genotypic ratio is something that is 1 is to 2 is to 1. It is showing its specificity, that is homozygous, heterozygous, and homozygous. Clear with it? So this is all about one way of understanding it. So there is another way. Okay, there is another example is also there where how it comes when it comes to the coloration of the flower. Okay, right. So when you see here, right, again, George Mendelian, he started, like he continued, he carried out conducting the experiment. So in the monohybrid cross, Mendelian began with a pair of pea plant with the two contrasting tails. So we got to know like tall and draft, everything was done. So then he concluded something. So again, he conducted an experiment with several contrasting characters, such as now coloration. Okay, now it was about coloration. So as a result, what he found, so when he took one was actually purple or violet color flower, and the another one was white. Okay, so your capital W is actually indicating the violet color, where small w is indicating the white color flower plant. So when he crossed these two, okay, homozygous plant in F1 generation, as a result, all were in F1 generation, all were what? Violet color plant now. So all were violet colored, like the plant which was giving violet flower. So he continued the experiment, and now his intention was to study, what is actually the unknown homozygous dominant, what it is. So what he did is surprisingly observed that one out of four plants were dwarf, while the other three were tall. So in general, what he did is he took up an experiment where he again took a what do you say that dominant. Okay, he took a dominant phenotype here. So dominant phenotype was unknown. Okay, so that genotype was unknown. Phenotype is nothing but its character, where genotype was unknown till that was being, okay, that was being crossed with some unknown, what do you say that dominant phenotype. Getting? So if you want to understand this experiment simply, so in tall and draft we get to know how it actually works. But now in general, in depth, if I need to understand, okay, how this dominancy and recessive is working, so for that what he did is in F1 generation, so as we got to know, all were what, all were violet in color. So now we don't know whether they are homozygous or heterozygous. Like which one is homozygous and which one is heterozygous, or what is exactly how we are going to get the pure character. So that's why what he did is he took one F1 generation which is heterozygous. Okay. So which is actually what? An heterozygous which was dominant, which heterozygous. We don't know what it is. So heterozygous, that means we will be having one is capital W, one is small w. So that is the reason why we are getting violet in color. So now that was been crossed with one of a homozygous violet plant. Okay, so it was been crossed with what? Sorry, homozygous white plant. Getting? So this is what heterozygous. This is homozygous white flower plant. So when they were being crossed, right? So as a result, we got now 50-50 ratio, where half of the flower was violet and half of the flower are white. So now we got to know that unknown flower is what here? It is heterozygous because none of them were homozygous. You got this experiment. So just to know the unknown genotypic factor, so what he did is he took a F1 generation plant. F1 generation, all the plants which was bearing flower were violet. So by taking that violet flower, he crossed it with the homozygous recessive flower, that is white color flower. As a result, what we got? Capital W, small w, then capital W, small w, and this two are small w, small w, small w, small w. So these are recessive now. Obviously, it will be white. So now what we got to know? The flowered plant, both were, what do you say that? Heterozygous itself. So unknown flower here, which is purple in color. So what it indicates whether it is an homozygous or heterozygous? It indicates it is an heterozygous, and it is an example for test cross. Test cross is nothing but we are trying to identify so whether the F1 generation, the plant or the flower or whatever that is the breed that we are getting, whether they are homozygous or heterozygous, to know the genotype of an unknown, character or unknown plant or unknown flower. So the test cross is conducted. Okay. So this was all about what? The Mendel's experiment. So based on his observation, based on these basic observation, so that is the monohybrid cross
Mendelian, he proposed two general rule to consolidate his, what do you say, that understanding in inheritance in monohybrid cross. So, such as today, we normally call that as principle of or law of inheritance, and that is the first law of dominance, and the second law, that is law of segregation. Clear? So one is the law of dominance, and another one is law of segregation. There is another law called non-Mendelian law, which also I'm going to discuss. So this is clear for right now. Cool.